How about now? So there was no audio? I don't know why. Hello, 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 hello. Okay, try something else. How about now? Tell me if it's still working. Because I am back on. Still working? Okay. All right. Sorry about that. I don't quite know how that ended up muted. Anyway, so what I was saying is I'm going to do something. Well, first of all, let's start over. Hello, welcome to Dangerous Ideas. That first beginning was epic. I'm going to do something with this episode that I don't think I've ever done, which is to spend perhaps a whole hour on a speech by Professor Jeffrey Sachs to the EU. He really just educated them on their own goddamn countries and what's going on with the war in Ukraine and the history of the war in Ukraine, etc. And this speech is so important on so many levels that I just want to go through it with you guys. And I know that they, like, you'll see. See if you really think that this was a bad idea to spend this show on this speech. And I will interject here and there, but I'm gonna let Professor Jeffrey Sachs do a lot of the speaking. And that's about it. New episode of Unredacted tonight comes out Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. I hope you'll be there for it. Anyway, let's do it. Let's can do it. And yes, I have him on like 1.3 or 4 speed because I think you guys can handle it. I think it's kind of like getting in a car and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna go 80 miles an hour. I think you're gonna be all right.
This because what I want to explain in my point of view is not secondhand. It's not ideology. It's what I've seen with my own eyes and experienced during this period. In my understanding of the events that have befallen Europe in many contexts, and I'll include not only the Ukraine crisis, but Serbia 1999, the wars in the Middle East, including Iraq, Syria, the wars in Africa, including Sudan, Somalia,
Okay. Now everything is, well, I think it's working again. Let's try and keep going. I'm not sure what's going on.
More than 40 years now. What happened, more than 30 years, I should say.
Thank you, Jay Blue, for supporting the show.
The United States came to the view, especially in 1990, 91, and then with the end of the Soviet Union, that the U.S. now ran the world, and that the U.S. did not have to heed anybody's views, red lines, concerns, security viewpoints, or any international obligations, or any UN framework. I'm sorry to put it so plainly, but I do want you to understand.
What he's describing is a lawless country that thinks it rules the world. And this comes as a shock, apparently, to the EU Parliament.
I tried very hard in 1991 to get help for Gorbachev, who I think was the greatest statesman of our modern time. I recently read the archived memo of the National Security Council discussion of my proposal, how they completely dismissed it and laughed it off the table when I said that the United States should help the Soviet Union in financial stabilization and in making its reforms. And the memo documents, including some of my former colleagues at Harvard in particular, saying we will do the minimum that we will do to prevent disaster, but the minimum. It's not our job to help. Quite the contrary, it's not our interest to help. When the Soviet Union ended in 1991, the view became even more exaggerated. And I can name chapter and verse, but the view was we run the show. Cheney, Wolfowitz, and many other names that you will have come to know, literally believed this is now a US world, and we will do as we want. We will clean up from the former Soviet Union. We will take out any remaining allies. Countries like Iraq, Syria, and so forth will go. And we've been experiencing this foreign policy for now essentially 33 years. Europe has paid a heavy price for this because Europe has not had any foreign policy during this period that I can figure out. No voice, no unity, no clarity, no European interests, only American loyalty. There were moments where there were disagreements, and very, I think, wonderful disagreements.
He talks about this at various points throughout, about how Europe has just ceded its foreign policy to the United States, sometimes to Ukraine, but largely to the United States. And he doesn't use these words, but it's one of the things I've said about the Ukraine proxy war was part of the point of it for the U.S. empire was to put Europe back in a vassal state situation where they weren't economically aligning or connected to Russia. And that part of it has succeeded.
Especially in the last time of significance was 2003 in the Iraq War, when France and Germany said, we don't support the United States going around the UN Security Council for this war. That war, by the way, was directly concocted by Netanyahu and his colleagues in the US Pentagon. I'm not saying that it was a link or mutuality. I'm saying it was a direct war. That was a war carried out for Israel. It was a war that Paul Wolfowitz and Douglas Feith coordinated with Netanyahu. And that was the last time that Europe had a voice. And I spoke with European leaders then, and they were very clear, and it was quite wonderful. Europe lost its voice entirely after that, but especially in 2008. Now, what happened after 1991 to get to 2008 is that the United States decided that unipolarity meant that NATO would enlarge somewhere from Brussels to Vladivostok, step by step. There would be no end to eastward enlargement of NATO. This would be the US unipolar world. If you play the game of Risk as a child, like I did, this is the US idea, to have the peace on every part of the board. Any place without a US military base is an enemy, basically. Neutrality is a dirty word in the US political lexicon.
And when he says any place without a U.S. military base, you have to keep in mind there are 900, at its highest, more like 1,000 U.S. military bases around the world. And if you were to actually see a map of the globe with an American flag for every military base, it would look like it was just about covered, except you'd notice these spots where there was a vacancy of U.S. military bases, and it would essentially be China, Russia, Iran, but it wouldn't be much.
Perhaps the dirtiest word. At least if you're an enemy, we know you're an enemy. If you are neutral, you're subversive. Because then you're really against us, because you're not telling us. You're pretending to be neutral. So this was the mindset, and the decision was taken formally in 1994, when President Clinton signed off on NATO enlargement to the east. You will recall that in February 7th, 1991,
what do you mean? Clinton? How could this have anything to do with Clinton? He's a Democrat. Democrats don't create war and put us at the brink of nuclear war, right? It's just Republicans, it's not Democrat. Oh, both of them.
Hans-Dietrich Genscher and James Baker III spoke with Gorbachev. Genscher gave a press conference afterwards where he explained, NATO will not move eastward. We will not take advantage of the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact. And understand that was in a juridical context, not a casual context. This was the end of World War II being negotiated for German reunification. And an agreement was made that NATO will not move 1 inch eastward. And it was explicit, and it is in countless documents. And just look up National Security Archive of George Washington University, and you can get dozens of documents. It's a website called What Gorbachev Heard About NATO. Take a look, because everything you're told by the US is a lie about this. But the archives are perfectly clear. So the decision was taken in 1994 to expand NATO all the way to Ukraine. This is a project. This is not one administration or another. This is a US government project that started more than 30 years ago.
That's one of the most key points. This proxy war is part of a long-standing effort that started in the early 90s. And of course, that upends what we're told, the propaganda we get from the U.S. media, which is 2022, Putin invaded. What? No. Why would this happen? Why, Russia? Why? This is part of a long-standing effort by the United States to have hegemony. He calls it unipolar world hegemony. And this did not start 2 years ago. It didn't even start in 2014. Started long before that.
In 1997, Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote The Grand Chessboard. That is not just musings of Mr. Brzezinski. That is the presentation of the decisions of the United States government explained to the public, which is how these books work. And the book describes the eastward enlargement of Europe and of NATO as simultaneous events. And there's a good chapter in that book that says, what will Russia do as Europe and NATO expand eastward? And I knew Zbigniew Brzezinski personally. He was very nice to me. I was advising Poland. He was a big help. He was a very nice and smart man, and he got everything wrong. So in 1997, he wrote in detail why Russia could do nothing but accede to the eastward expansion of NATO and Europe.
I argue a little with Jeffrey Sachs' version of the word nice. If you're nice, you don't you don't set out how the U.S. can achieve hegemony and destroy the rest of the world in a book you wrote. But anyway.
In fact, he says the eastward expansion of Europe, and not just Europe, but NATO. This was a plan, a project. And he explains how Russia will never align with China. Unthinkable. Russia will never align with Iran. Russia has no vocation other than the European vocation. So as Europe moves east, there's nothing Russia can do about it. So says yet another American strategist. Is it any question why we're in war all the time? Because one thing about America is we always know what our counterparts are going to do, and we always get it wrong. And
yeah, I mean, they get it all wrong, but they also think that they can just handle. They think they can just crush these countries no matter what the outcome is, no matter how Russia responds. They think they can just win. And by the way, someone in the chat said that Jeffrey Sachs should be a regular on CNN, MSNBC, etc. Well, he used to be, maybe not regular, but he used to be on far more often. And he has said in interviews that essentially the last time he was invited to these networks was when he said on air that the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And they wrapped up his segment quickly, and he's essentially never been invited back on those networks.
One reason we always get it wrong is that in game theory that the American strategists play, you don't actually talk to the other side. You just know what the other side's strategy is. It's wonderful. It saves so much time. You don't need any diplomacy. So this project began, and we had a continuity of government for 30 years, until maybe yesterday, perhaps. 30 years of a project.
And of course, by yesterday, he means Trump's second term. It does seem that Trump is pushing against what U.S. establishment has been working at for many years. There's a million things about Trump that I despise. That's not one of them. That's one area that Trump is surprisingly correct.
Ukraine and Georgia were the keys to the project. Why? Because America learned everything it knows from the British. And so we are the wannabe British Empire. And what the British Empire understood in 1853, Lord Palmerston, excuse me, is that you surround Russia in the Black Sea and you deny Russia access to the Eastern Mediterranean. And all you're watching is an American project to do that in the 21st century. The idea was that there would be Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Georgia as the Black Sea littoral that would deprive Russia of any international status by blocking the Black Sea and essentially by neutralizing Russia as more than a local power. Brzezinski's completely clear about this. And before Brzezinski, there was Mackinder. And who owns the island of the world owns the world. So this project goes back a long time. I think it goes back basically to Palmerston. And again, I've lived through every administration. I've known these presidents. I've known their teams. Nothing changed much from Clinton to Bush to Obama to Trump 1 to Biden. Maybe they got worse step by step. Biden was the worst in my view. Maybe also because he was not compos mentis for the last couple of years. And I say that seriously, not as a snarky remark. The American political system is a system of image. It's a system of media manipulation every day. It is a PR system. And so you could have a president that basically doesn't function and have that in power for 2 years and actually have that president run for re-election. And one damn thing is he had to stand on a stage for 90 minutes by himself. And that was the end of it. Had it not been that mistake, he would have gone on to have his candidacy, whether he was sleeping after 4 p.m. in the afternoon or not.
Of course, you know, this is something you and I know, but it's so refreshing to hear it from somebody who's actually in these rooms, who has actually talked with these people. I mean, they probably talk to him a little bit less now that he's been so outspoken about this stuff, but these are things that you and I have been saying for months. We said it during a lot of the Biden presidency, that he was not cogent, that he was not actually running things. The people that were running things were some, Blinken and Jake Sullivan and national security advisors, et cetera. And I think it's later in the speech, he talks about having an hour-long conversation, Sachs did, hour-long conversation with Jake Sullivan, trying to convince him not to go into this war in Ukraine, not to make this war in Ukraine happen. And I think what is so gripping about this speech and important about this speech is it's coming from somebody that actually is in these rooms or on these phone calls. Like I said, he used to be far more prevalent probably in these rooms and phone calls, but nowadays they're probably furious with him for being so outspoken and they talk to him a lot less. But still, he knows these people. He knows how they think. And it's really interesting to hear it from someone who's, I hate to fucking shoot me for quoting Hamilton, but in the room where it happens. Okay. Sorry. I didn't. All right.
So this is actually the reality. Everybody goes along with it. It's impolite to say anything that I'm saying because we don't speak the truth about almost anything in this world right now. So this project went on from the 1990s. Bombing Belgrade 78 straight days in 1999 was part of this project. Splitting apart the country when borders are sacrosanct, aren't they indeed, except for Kosovo? That's fine, because borders are sacrosanct except when America changes them. Sudan was another related project. The South Sudan rebellion. Did that just happen because South Sudanese rebelled? Or can I give you the CIA playbook to please understand as grown-ups what this is about?
There's so much about this that I love, but I love, I mean, it's just a throwaway comment, but borders are so important right now, right? We have this hatred of immigrants. We're told to, all your anger, everything that's wrong in your life pointed at immigrants because they're coming across our border. Well, borders are, like he said, sacrosanct until they're not. Until the ruling elite, mainly the ruling elite of the United States, decide, oh, that border doesn't matter. This one doesn't matter. That one we can fudge. Oh, we can take more land here. Oh, it's not the Gulf of Mexico anymore. It's the Gulf of America. These names and borders, they only matter as long as the ruling elite say that's where they are or that they matter. It like people act like the border between the United States and Mexico is a holy thing sent down by the Lord Almighty. No, it's something we made up, and so that we can hate others, so that we can say, "Hey, we're in the good group, you're in the bad group, and you suck." Borders are increasingly just designed to keep the population containment zones for the ruling elite. The ruling elite don't give a shit about borders. You think Elon Musk cares when he gets on a plane what other nation he's landing? Am I allowed into that country? Is it okay for me to cross this border? No. Of course, he can go anywhere he wants because he's the richest man in the world. That's all that matters. He could show up in any country right now. So borders are really for the poor, or at least not the ultra rich, not for the people running things.
Military events are costly They require equipment, training, base camps, intelligence, finance. That comes from big powers. That doesn't come from local insurrections. South Sudan did not defeat North Sudan or Sudan in a tribal battle. It was a U.S. project. I would go often to Nairobi and meet U.S. military or senators or others with deep interests in Sudan's politics. This was part of the game of unipolarity. So the NATO enlargement, as you know, started in 1999 with Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic. And Russia was extremely unhappy about it. But these were countries still far from the border. And Russia protested, but of course to no avail. Then George Bush Jr. came in. When 9/11 occurred, President Putin pledged all support. And then the U.S. Decided in September 20th, 2001, that it would launch 7 wars in 5 years. And you can listen to General Wesley Clark online talk about that. He was NATO's supreme commander in 1999. He went to the Pentagon on September 20th, 2001. He was handed the paper explaining 7 wars. These, by the way, were Netanyahu's wars. The idea was partly to clean up old Soviet allies and partly to take out supporters of Hamas and Hezbollah. Because Netanyahu's idea was there will be one state, thank you, only one state. It will be Israel. Israel will control all of the territory. And anyone that objects, we will overthrow. Not we exactly, our friend, the United States. That's U.S. policy until this morning. We don't know whether it will change. Now, the only wrinkle is that maybe the U.S. will own Gaza instead of Israel owning Gaza. But the idea has been around at least for 25 years. It actually goes back to a document called Clean Break that Netanyahu and his American political team put together in 1996 to end the idea of the two-state solution. You can also find it online. So these are projects. These are long-term events. These aren't, is it Clinton? Is it Bush? Is it Obama? That's the boring way to look at American politics, as the day-to-day game. But that's not what American politics is.
He called it the boring way. It's really the ignorant way. The day-to-day game is just a tiny piece of it. And I do my best. I mean, sometimes I may fall into the day-to-day game, but I do my best to always, when I'm giving you the day-to-day game, to give you the deeper understanding of what's going on here. And there are so many voices in mainstream media, of course, because their job is pure propaganda. But there's so many voices in indie media who are not trying to do propaganda. They just fall in to the day-to-day, chess game, the tit for tat, the Real Housewives. It really is like if you cover the day-to-day bickering of our ruling elite, of our politicians and world politicians, and you don't get into the deeper issues, the deeper plans, then you really are you might as well be covering what happened on the Real Housewives last night. Is that still a thing? Are there still Real Housewives shows? Anyway, you might as well just be like, did you see her flip over that table? That was crazy. If you aren't going to get into the deeper machinations of what the fuck's going on here. And that's essentially what he's saying. Be an adult about it. He's trying to get the EU Parliament to actually be an adult about what the hell's going on here.
So the next round of NATO enlargement came in 2004 with 7 more countries. The 3 Baltic states, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovenia, and Slovakia. At this point, Russia was pretty damn upset. This was a complete violation of the post-war order agreed with German reunification. Essentially, it was a fundamental trick or defection of the U.S. from a cooperative arrangement, is what it amounted to, because they believe in unipolarity. So as everybody recalls, because we just had the Munich Security Conference last week in 2007, President Putin said, stop, enough. Enough. Stop now. And of course, what that meant was in 2008, the United States jammed down Europe's throat enlargement of NATO to Ukraine and to Georgia. This is a long-term project. I listened to Mr. Saakashvili in New York in May of 2008, and I walked out, called Sonia, and said, this man's crazy. And a month later, a war broke out because the United States told this guy, we saved Georgia. And he stands at the Council on Foreign Relations, says, Georgia's in the center of Europe. Well, it ain't, ladies and gentlemen. It's not in the center of Europe. And the most recent events are not helpful for Georgia, for its safety, and your MPs going there, or MEPs going there. And
So I'm going to skip a little bit because I want to be able to get to a lot of this.
That's what the CIA does for a living. Okay, please know it. It's a very unusual kind of foreign policy. But in America, if you don't like the other side, you don't negotiate with them, you try to overthrow them, preferably covertly. If it doesn't work covertly, you do it overtly. You always say it's not our fault. They're the aggressor. They're the other side. They're Hitler. That comes up every 2 or 3 years, whether it's Saddam Hussein, whether it's Assad, whether it's Putin. That's very convenient. That's the only foreign policy explanation the American people are ever given anywhere. Well, we're facing Munich 1938. Well, we're facing Munich 1938. Can't talk to the other side. They're evil, implacable foes. That's the only model of foreign policy we ever hear from our mass media. And the mass media repeats it entirely because it's completely suborned by the US government. Now, in 2014, the US worked actively to overthrow Yanukovych. Everybody knows the phone call intercepted by my Columbia University colleague, Victoria Nuland, and the US Ambassador Peter Piot. You don't get better evidence. The Russians intercepted her call and they put it on the internet. Listen to it. It's fascinating. I know all these people. By the way, by doing that, they all got promoted in the Biden administration.
Meaning by creating the 2014 Maidan coup, inserting the people they wanted to into Ukraine, putting in U.S. puppets. That's what he means. By doing that, they got promoted.
That's the job. Now, when the Maidan occurred, I was called immediately. Oh, Professor Sachs, the new Ukrainian prime minister would like to see you to talk about the economic crisis. Because I'm pretty good at that. And so I flew to Kiev and I was walked around the Maidan. And I was told how the US paid the money for all the people around the Maidan. Spontaneous, revolution of dignity. Ladies and gentlemen, please, where do all these media outlets come from? Where does all this organization come from? Where do all these buses come from? Where do all these people called in come from?
I think you followed what he was saying, but he's talking about the 2014 Maidan coup, which was this spontaneous revolution in Ukraine that brought down the pro-Russian leaders of Ukraine and inserted pro-Western leaders of Ukraine. And, you know, he's saying, oh, this spontaneous revolution. What do you know? All the media is there and they all have their stories aligned and there's buses of people showing up. And Victoria Nuland was literally in the Maidan Square handing out chocolates and candy and stuff. That's all just spontaneous. It's all just accidental. It's amazing how that went down. Yeah, someone said Sean Penn, and Sean Penn was there high-fiving people. What are the odds? And Jeffrey Sachs is saying, wake up. Who in the right? What adult thinks this was spontaneous and not coordinated?
Are you kidding? This is organized effort. And it's not a secret, except to citizens of Europe and the United States. Everyone else understands it quite clearly. Then came Minsk, and especially Minsk II, which, by the way, was modeled on South Tyrolean autonomy.
He's talking about the Minsk agreements, which were designed to keep peace between Russia and Ukraine. And as I mentioned yesterday on yesterday's show, it has since been admitted by Merkel and others that these agreements, the U.S. and Ukraine and Europe, the ones that were privy to it, never intended to actually abide by the Minsk agreements they were signing with Russia. They just wanted to buy time for Ukraine to get armed for the war they were creating, for the proxy war they were creating. And so they signed the Minsk agreements and then violated them.
And the Belgians could have related to Minsk II very well. It said there should be autonomy for the Russian-speaking regions in the east of Ukraine. It was supported unanimously by the UN Security Council. The United States and Ukraine decided it was not to be enforced. Germany and France, which were the guarantors of the Normandy process, let it go. And it was absolutely another direct American unipolar action with Europe, as usual, playing completely useless subsidiary role, even though it was a guarantor of the agreement. Trump, one, raised the armaments. There were many thousands of deaths in the shelling by Ukraine in the Donbass. There was no Minsk II agreement.
And he's talking about many thousands of deaths prior to 2022, prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, meaning Ukrainians were killing fellow Ukrainians that were Russian culturally, that were Russian speakers, etc. I've talked a bunch about that as well. So this war, even the killing part of this war, did not start in 2022. It was going on for years. Some of it under Trump's first term.
And then Biden came into office. And again, I know all these people. I used to be a member of the Democratic Party. I now am strictly sworn to be a member of no party because both are the same anyway. And because this is, the Democrats became complete warmongers over time, and there was not one voice about peace, just like most of your parliamentarians, the same way. So at the end of 1991, Putin put on the table a last effort in two security agreement drafts, one with Europe and one with the United States. The U.S. put on the table December 15th, 2021. I had an hour call with Jake Sullivan in the White House begging, Jake, avoid the war. You can avoid the war. All you have to do is say NATO will not enlarge to Ukraine. And he said to me, oh, NATO's not going to enlarge to Ukraine. Don't worry about it. I said, Jake, say it publicly. No, we can't say it publicly. I said, Jake, you're going to have a war over something that isn't even going to happen? He said, don't worry, Jeff, there will be no war. These are not very bright people. I'm telling you, if I can give you my honest view, they're not very bright people. And I dealt with them for more than 40 years.
I'd say it's about 50-50 as to whether Jake Sullivan, who was National Security Advisor to Biden, and as Jeffrey Sachs is saying there, I was begging him not to have this war. And I'd say it's 50-50 as to whether Jake Sullivan was just telling him, oh, there's not going to be a war, when in fact he and the inner circles around Biden knew there was going to be a war, that they were going to make sure there was a war because they wanted that war to drain Russia, to try and separate them internationally from the rest of the world, to put tons of sanctions on them, to blow up the Nord Stream, et cetera, et cetera. So they wanted that war. Now, he said to Jeffrey Sachs on the phone, there won't be a war. Maybe not even 50-50. I'd say there's like a 70% chance that Sullivan was just saying that to him. And in fact, in the closed door meetings, they knew they wanted a war. They wanted, because you got to remember that the U.S. establishment views Russia fighting Ukraine as Russians fighting Russians, as Russians killing Russians, because it's all former Soviet bloc, same thing to us. So what's the problem? It's Russians killing Russians. That's perfect for our ruling elite. I mean, they're sociopaths. They don't care about human lives. So Russians killing Russians, high five, awesome. That's how they view it. Now, Sullivan's not going to say that to Jeffrey Sachs, but anyway.
They talk to themselves. They don't talk to anybody else. They play game theory. In non-cooperative game theory, you don't talk to the other side. You just make your strategy. This is the essence of game theory. It's not negotiation theory. It's not peacemaking theory. It is unilateral, non-cooperative theory, if you know formal game theory. That's what they play. It started at the Rand Corporation. That's what they still play. In 2019, there's a paper by Rand, How Do We Extend Russia? Do you know they wrote a paper, which Biden followed? How do we annoy Russia? That's literally the strategy. How do we annoy Russia? We're trying to provoke it, trying to make it break apart, maybe have regime change, maybe have unrest, maybe have economic crisis. That's what you call your ally. Are you kidding? So I had a long and frustrating phone call with Sullivan. I was standing out in the freezing cold. I happened to be trying to have a ski day. And there I was, Jake, don't have the war. Oh, there'll be no war, Jeff. We know a lot of what happened the next month, which is that they refused to negotiate. The stupidest idea of NATO is the so-called open door policy. Are you kidding? NATO reserves the right to go where it wants without any neighbor having any say whatsoever. Well, I tell the Mexicans and the Canadians, don't try it. You know, Trump may want to take over Canada. So Canada could say to China, why don't you build a military base in Ontario? I wouldn't advise it. And
I feel like it was a little confused the way he said it, but his point is NATO claims they can go anywhere, that they can go anywhere and then build essentially U.S., but U.S. and European military bases in whatever country they want. Now imagine the reverse. Imagine Russia said, let's say they brought back the Warsaw Pact, and they said, hey, our Warsaw Pact can go in because NATO was created as a alternate to fight, to wage Cold War against the Warsaw Pact, which Warsaw Pact's gone, but NATO's still there and has grown. So imagine Russia said, we're brought back the Warsaw Pact, and, we're adding Mexico and Canada. So we can put Russian bases in Mexico and Canada. How do you think the U.S. would respond to that? How do you think that'd go over? But that's what the U.S. and NATO is asking Russia to do, is to have these military bases on their borders and just be fine with it. Just sit there and take it. Like, it's, of course, laughable that the U.S. would, if the roles were reversed, the U.S. would flip the out. Be like a monkey throwing its poo. It would be a mess.
the United States would not say, well, it's an open door. That's their business. I mean, they can do what they want. That's not our business. But grown-ups in Europe repeat this. In Europe, in your commission, your high representative. This is nonsense stuff. This is not even baby geopolitics. This is just not thinking at all. So the war started. What was Putin's intention in the war? I can tell you what his intention was. It was to force Zelensky to negotiate neutrality. And that happened within 7 days of the start of the invasion. You should understand this, not the propaganda that's written about this. Oh, that they failed and he was going to take over Ukraine. Come on, ladies and gentlemen, understand something basic. The idea was to keep NATO, and what is NATO? It's the United States, off of Russia's border. No more, no less. I should add one very important point. Why are they so interested? First, because if China or Russia decided to have a military base on the Rio Grande or in the Canadian border, not only would the United States freak out, we'd have war within about 10 minutes. But because the United States unilaterally abandoned the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002 and ended the nuclear arms control framework by doing so. And this is extremely important to understand. The nuclear arms control framework is based on trying to block a first strike. The ABM treaty was a critical component of that. The US unilaterally walked out of the ABM treaty in 2002. It blew a Russian gasket. So everything I've been describing is in the context of the destruction of the nuclear framework as well. And starting in 2010, the US put in Aegis missile systems in Poland and then in Romania. And Russia doesn't like that. And one of the issues on the table in December and January, December 2021, January 2022, was, does the United States claim the right to put missile systems in Ukraine? And Blinken told Lavrov in January 2022, the United States reserves the right to put missile systems wherever it wants. That's your putative ally. And now let's put intermediate missile systems back in Germany. The United States walked out of the INF treaty unilaterally in 2019. There is no nuclear arms framework right now. None. When Zelensky said in 7 days, let's negotiate, I know the details of this exquisitely because I've talked to all the parties in detail. Within a couple of weeks, there was a document exchanged that President Putin had approved, that Lavrov had presented, that was being managed by the Turkish mediators. I flew to Ankara to listen in detail to what the mediators were doing. Ukraine walked away unilaterally from a near agreement. Why? Because the United States told them to. Because the UK added icing to the cake.
Thank you. I've been saying this for 2 years. This thing could have been over in the first month with almost no one dead. It could have been over. It would have been over. The US and Britain made sure to stop it.
By having Bojo go in early April to Ukraine and explain. And he has recently, and if your security is in the hands of Boris Johnson, God help us all. Keith Starmer turns out to be even worse. It's unimaginable, but it is true. Boris Johnson has explained, and you can look it up on the website, that what's at stake here is Western hegemony.
I covered that when he did it. He wrote an article which was published in one of the main newspapers about how this war in Ukraine is about Western hegemony, which is the definition of a proxy war. He also said that he also recently said on air, on a video, that it is a proxy war.
Not Ukraine, Western hegemony. Michael and I met at the Vatican with a group in the spring of 2022, where we wrote a document explaining nothing good can come out of this war for Ukraine. Negotiate now, because anything that takes time will mean massive amounts of deaths, risk of nuclear escalation, and likely loss of the war. I want to change one word from what we wrote then. Nothing was wrong in that document. And since that document, since the U.S. talked the negotiators away from the table, about 1 million Ukrainians have died or been severely wounded. And the American senators, who are as nasty and cynical and corrupt as imaginable, say this is wonderful expenditure of our money because no Americans are dying. It's the pure proxy war. One of our senators nearby me, Blumenthal, says this out loud. Mitt Romney says this out loud. It's best money America can spend. No Americans are dying. It's unreal. Now, just to bring us up to yesterday, this failed. This project failed. The idea of the project was that Russia would fold its hand. The idea all along was Russia can't resist, as Zbigniew Brzezinski explained in 1997. The Americans thought we have the upper hand. We're going to win.
I'll of course let him keep going, but I just wanted to say I slightly disagree with this in that the Rand paper and others have stated that the goal of this was they're multi-tiered, and some of it has succeeded. Blowing up the Nord Stream has succeeded. Putting massive sanctions on Russia to separate them from some of the world economically has succeeded. Putting Europe back into an extreme vassal position underneath the U.S. has succeeded. So there are aspects of it that have succeeded. The largest goals of it have not succeeded. Putin is not a failed president. Russia is not collapsing. Their economy is not collapsing. There's more alignment than ever between China and Russia. So there's a lot of aspects of it that have not succeeded, but there are also some that succeeded. I think blowing up the Nord Stream was one of the biggest things the U.S. wanted to get out of this.
Because we're going to bluff them. They're not really going to fight. They're not really going to mobilize. The nuclear option of cutting them out of SWIFT, that's going to do them in. The economics.
You know what he means there, the SWIFT banking system, which much of the world operates on, definitely the entire Western world. And, cutting him out of that, cutting Russia out of that is a huge hit to their economy. And like he's saying, they thought that would do him in. And instead, what it's done is fast forward an effort by China, by BRICS, to create an alternative to the SWIFT system, because they see what's been done to Russia and they don't want to be treated like that either. So it is fast forwarded much of the, waning of the U.S. empire in many regards.
Sanctions, that's going to do them in. The HIMARS, that's going to do them in. The ATACMS, the F-16s. Honestly, I've listened to this for 70 years. I've listened to it as semi-understanding, I'd say, for about 56 years. They speak nonsense every day. My country, my government. This is so familiar to me, completely familiar. I begged the Ukrainians. And I had a track record with the Ukrainians. I advised the Ukrainians. I'm not anti-Ukrainian, I'm pro-Ukrainian completely. I said, save your lives, save your sovereignty, save your territory, be neutral. Don't listen to the Americans. I repeated to them the famous adage of Henry Kissinger, that to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. Okay, so let me repeat that for Europe. To be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, but to be a friend is fatal. So let me now finalize a few words about Trump. Trump does not want the losing hand. This is why it is more likely than not this war will end, because Trump and President Putin will agree to end the war. If Europe does all its great warmongering, it doesn't matter. The war is ending. So get it out of your system.
I love that line. Because right now, Europe is just rallying around, no, we're going to keep fighting and we're going to help Zelensky. And Jeffrey Sachs is making the point, forget it. It's over. It's Trump and Putin in a room deciding how this thing ends. And it's going to be over. Now, he says the only reason Trump is doing it is because Trump doesn't want to have a loser on his dance card. He doesn't want Ukraine, the loser, in his as holding his hand into the oblivion. But I think it's a little more than that. I think Trump also has always, as we know, viewed China as the great threat, the great enemy, and Trump wants to get Russia aligned with the United States in a Cold War against China, and he views that as the main goal. So, he needs to end other conflicts in order to focus on his war with China, which is also insane, just insane in a different way.
Please tell your colleagues it's over. And it's over because Trump doesn't want to carry a loser. That's it. It's not some great morality. He doesn't want to carry a loser. This is a loser. The one that will be saved by the negotiations taking place right now is Ukraine. Second is Europe. Your stock market's rising in recent days by the horrible news of negotiations. I know this has been met with the sheer horror in these chambers, but this is the best news that you could get. Now, I encouraged, they don't listen to me, but I tried to reach out to some of the European leaders. Most don't want to hear anything from me at all. But I said, don't go to Kiev. Go to Moscow. Discuss with your counterparts. Are you kidding? You're Europe. You're 450 million people. You're a $20 trillion economy. You should be the main economic trading partner of Russia. It's natural links. By the way, if anyone would like to discuss how the U.S. blew up Nord Stream, I'd be happy to talk about that. So the Trump administration is imperialist at heart. It is great powers dominate the world. It is, we will do what we want when we can. We will be better than a senescent Biden, and we'll cut our losses where we have to. There are several war zones in the world, the Middle East being another. We don't know what will happen with that. Again, if Europe had a proper policy, you could stop that war. I'll explain how. But war with China is also a possibility. So I'm not saying that we're at the new age of peace, but we are in a very different kind of politics right now. And Europe should have a foreign policy. And not just a foreign policy of Russophobia, a foreign policy that is a realistic foreign policy that understands Russia's situation, that understands Europe's situation, that understands what America is and what it stands for, that tries to avoid Europe being invaded by the United States, because it's not impossible that America will just land troops in Danish territory. I'm not joking. And I don't think they're joking. And Europe needs a foreign policy, a real one. Not a, yes, we'll bargain with Mr. Trump and meet him halfway. You'll know what that will be like? Give me a call afterwards. Please.
I love how he talks to them like children. Because they are children. They're behaving like children. He's like, you need a grown-up foreign policy. You need to be grown-ups now. Put on your big boy pants.
Don't have American officials as head of Europe. Have European officials. Please. Have a European foreign policy. You're going to be living with Russia for a long time. So please negotiate with Russia. There are real security issues on the table. But the bombast and the Russophobia is not serving your security at all. It's not serving Ukraine's security at all. It contributed to 1 million casualties in Ukraine from this idiotic American adventure that you signed on to and then became the lead cheerleaders of. Solves nothing. On the Middle East, by the way, the U.S. completely handed over foreign policy to Netanyahu 30 years ago. The Israel lobby dominates American politics. Just have no doubt about it. I could explain for hours how it works. It's very dangerous.
Yep.
I'm hoping that Trump will not destroy his administration and worse, the Palestinian people because of Netanyahu, who I regard as a war criminal, properly indicted by the ICC, and that needs to be told no more, that there will be a state of Palestine on the borders of the 4th of June, 1967, according to international law, as the only way for peace. It's the only way for Europe to have peace on your borders with the Middle East, is the two-state solution. There is only one obstacle to it, by the way, and that is the veto of the United States in the UN Security Council. So if you want to have some influence, tell the United States, drop the veto. You are together with 180 countries in the world. The only ones that oppose a Palestinian state are the United States.
I love that he goes through this list.
Israel, Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, Papua New Guinea, Mr. Malay, and Paraguay.
And that's all, by the way, that's almost the same list. That's almost the same list as the countries that say Taiwan is not part of China. Although actually the United States officially does say Taiwan's part of China. So the United States would not be on that list. But the other ones like Nauru and Palau, and so, it's basically the countries that the United States or maybe Britain have so much power over that they can just get them to agree to these like insane votes.
So this is a place where Europe could have a big influence. Europe has gone silent about the JCPOA and Iran. Netanyahu's greatest dream in life is a war between the United States and Iran. He's not given up, and it's not impossible that that would come also. And that's because the U.S. in this regard does not have an independent foreign policy. It is run by Israel. It's tragic. It's amazing, by the way. And it could end. Trump may say that he wants foreign policy back. Maybe. I'm hoping that it's the case. Finally, let me just say with respect to China, China is not an enemy. China is just a success story. That's why it is viewed by the United States as an enemy, because China is a bigger economy than the United States.
Yep, it has to do with hegemony. And the U.S. loses hegemony as soon as China becomes the biggest economic power in the world, which they're essentially there already. And then as more and more people stop selling oil in petrodollars, the U.S. will dwindle even more.
That's all.
Okay, I'm going to skip ahead to some of his answers because his answers to these questions are also excellent. But
all my grandchildren.
Okay, that's the old bullshit about how he's got Czech relatives or something.
And both sides and to negotiate. There are two kinds of realists, a defensive realist and an offensive realist. My dear friend, John Mearsheimer, who is the offensive realist, we're very close friends and I love him, but I believe more than he does, you talk to the other side and you find a way to make an understanding. And so basically, Russia is not going to invade Europe. This is the fundamental point. It may get up to the Dnieper River. It's not going to invade Europe. But there are real issues. The main issue for Russia was the United States, because Russia, as a major power and the largest nuclear power in the world, was profoundly concerned about U.S. unipolarity from the beginning. Now that this is seemingly possibly ending, Europe has to open negotiations directly with Russia as well, because the United States will quickly lose interest, and you're going to be living with Russia for the next thousands of years.
Well, could you imagine that? Europe speaking directly to Russia, like as adults talking to each other? What? Can't have that. Can't have humans speaking to other humans. No. Europe could never act like adults and not just cave to whatever Trump wants.
Okay. So what do you want? You want to make sure that the Baltic states are secure. The best thing for the Baltic states is to stop their Russophobia. This is the most important thing. Estonia has about 25% Russian citizens, or Russian-speaking citizens, ethnic Russians. Latvia, the same. Don't provoke the neighbor. That's all. This is not hard. It really isn't hard. And again, I want to explain my point of view. I have helped these countries, the ones I'm talking about, trying to advise. I'm not their enemy. I'm not Putin's puppet. I'm not Putin's apologist. I worked in Estonia. They gave me, I think it's the second highest civilian honor that a president of Estonia can bestow on a non-national, because I designed their currency system for them in 1992. So I'm giving them advice. Do not stand there, Estonia, and say, we want to break up Russia. Are you kidding? Don't. This is not how to survive in this world. You survive with mutual respect, actually. You survive in negotiation. You survive in discussion. You don't outlaw the Russian language. Not a good idea when 25% of your population has the first language of Russian. It's not right, even if there weren't a giant on the border. It wouldn't be the right thing to do. You'd have it as an official language. You'd have a language of in lower school. You wouldn't antagonize the Russian Orthodox Church. So basically, we need to behave like grown-ups. And when I constantly say that they're acting like children, Sonia always says to me, that's unfair to children. Because this is worse than children. We have a 6-year-old granddaughter and a 3-year-old grandson, and they actually make up with their friends. And we don't tell them, go, just ridicule them tomorrow and every day. We say, go, give them a hug and go play. And they do. This is not hard. By the way, well, anyway, I won't belabor the point. Thank you. So elect a new government. No, I shouldn't say that. All I should say is change policy.
I don't want to have a political.
I don't know what that cut was.
Does that work? Yeah. Hi, my name's Kira. I'm a reporter with the Brussels Times. Thank you for the fascinating talk, Jeffrey. I just wanted to ask you about Trump's statements about wanting NATO members to increase their spending by 5%. And we're now seeing lots of countries scrambling to prove that they're going to do that, including Belgium. And given that Belgium is also the NATO headquarters, I wanted to ask you, what would be the appropriate response to those statements by NATO members? Thanks.
We don't see exactly eye to eye on this question. So let me give you my own view. My first recommendation, with all respect to Brussels, is move the NATO headquarters somewhere else. I mean it seriously, because one of the worst parts of European policy right now is a complete confusion of Europe and NATO. These are completely different, but they became exactly the same. Europe is much better than NATO. In my opinion, NATO isn't even needed anymore. I would have ended it in 1991. But because the US viewed it as an instrument of hegemony, not as a defense against Russia, it continued afterwards. But the confusion of NATO and Europe is deadly, because expanding Europe meant expanding NATO, period. And these should have been completely different things. So this is the first point. My own view, again, with all respect to Michael, we only had a brief conversation about it, is that Europe basically should have its own foreign policy and its own military security, its own strategic autonomy, so-called. And it should. I'm in favor of that. I would disband NATO, and maybe Trump is going to do it anyway. Maybe Trump's going to invade Greenland. Who knows? Then you're really going to find out what NATO means. So I do think that Europe...
You know, they got to laugh, but I did a segment on this a few weeks ago. It's actually not insane. I mean, it is insane. He's acting insane, but I mean, the idea that he might do it is a reality. That Trump is crazy enough to do something like invade Greenland and steal it from Denmark, and I also and he'd be pushing Europe to the brink of like, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to attack us? Are you going to attack the United States? Let's see how that goes for you. And these idiots have been bowing down to the U.S. empire for so long that they can't imagine that they'd be the target of it. But when you have an empire as vast as the United States and capitalist, where it just extracts everything and then looks for new lands to extract, it's a monster that has eaten everything around it and then looks for the new areas it will eat. And right now it needs to extract certain kinds of things because we're getting cut off by China, because we're creating this Cold War with China. And one of those things is minerals, various types of minerals, also there's oil, and I think there's some oil in Greenland as well. But that's not the main thing. I think the main thing is we've got to find a replacement for the minerals that we're going to lose as China cuts us off. And so it's Greenland, it's Ukraine, which we're signing a $500 billion minerals deal with Ukraine. Yeah, that's a deal. Now, when someone puts a gun to your head and says, give me your wallet, do you call that a deal? Yeah, I made a wallet deal with the guy in the street who had a mask on. He and I came to a wallet deal, and it was basically like I give him my wallet, and then he walks away. That was the deal we made. It was so that's the mineral deal we have with Ukraine. It's just extortion. But anyway, this is how an empire behaves. It eats everything it can, and then it moves on to the next thing. I mean, especially a capitalist empire, because capitalism needs endless growth on a planet with limited resources. So you eat everything you can, you move on to the next place, you eat everything you can there, and eventually, much like cancer, how does cancer end? Untreated, completely untouched, just let it run wild. How does it end? It ends with the death of the host. Well, in this case, the host is planet Earth, and capitalism is the cancer. Jeffrey Sachs didn't get into that part for some odd reason, but anyway. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up, but as you saw, such an important speech, and I really thought it was worth spending the hour on. A couple of important notes about this show. One is that Unredacted Tonight, episode 3, comes out Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern, premieres at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. People have loved it so far. If you haven't seen either of the first 2 episodes, I highly recommend you go check them out. Just go to linktree.com/LeeCamp. That's the easiest way to get there instead of giving you all the YouTube names and everything. Linktree.com/LeeCamp. It's the first link at the top of the page. First 2 episodes already out. If you haven't seen either one, check them out. Next episode comes out Thursday. Special guest. I'm not going to say who. Last name might be Hedges. Just saying. So that's Thursday. Another point about this show is my live streams have been Monday, Tuesday, Thursday for a long time now. And I am going to need to switch. I might start it next week. I'm going to need to switch Tuesdays to Friday because of creating Unredacted Tonight. I'm throwing my everything of myself into creating Unredacted Tonight, and it's been going well, but I am needing to figure out how I can still maintain all the rest of my schedule. And basically, I am realizing that because Tuesday is an important day to write and produce that show. So I think it'll ultimately be Monday, Thursday, Friday, I think will be my live streams. And I apologize for schedule changes. I hate them. I always prefer to just stick with what I've been doing. But sometimes it's just impossible. So it will likely be Monday, Thursday, Friday will be the live streams, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific. And of course, then you've also got Unredacted Tonight on Thursdays. Every other Wednesday, you've got Government Secrets. So a lot happening. What else? Those are the main things. If you prefer podcasts, all of this is in podcast form as well. It's called Moment of Clarity on Apple Podcasts. It's called Lee Camp Show on Spotify. And yeah, that's what I got. And I have a new Substack, by the way, which has proven rather popular in the first month it's been in operation. Substack.com/@RealLeeCamp, I think. No, sorry. Substack.com/RealLeeCamp. Maybe @RealLeeCamp? Let me see. Tell you in a second. @RealCamp. Yeah. So too many platforms. Let's see. Yeah. @RealLeeCamp, the @ symbol. So substack.com/@RealLeeCamp. That's also on my Linktree. So again, go to linktree.com/LeeCamp. You'll find all this. All right. I will not see you tomorrow, but I'll see you Thursday for both a live stream and new Unredacted Tonight. Thanks a lot. Keep fighting.
Well, brother, I salute you, though, man. You're one of the few that bring together this tremendous artistic talent and still be in such deep solidarity with oppressed people.
It's an honor to be here because I'll tell you, Lee, you have one of the funniest shows on television, bar none.
It's an enormous pleasure to be here. While I was waiting, I was leafing through your wonderful book.
The same to you. I love your show. Be happy to come back anytime.
Lee, this is one of the great honors of my long career, just to be in the same earth with you.
I'm sure.
We're just so blinded. We have so many blinders on because our society doesn't want us to know things. And so it takes shows like your show, and
it is clearly designed to eradicate.
Hey, good to see you.
Hey, Jill, how are you? Julian, thanks for joining me. Honor to have you, brother.
Consumerism is a theory that people should behave this way to help each other. It's not.
Mr. George Galloway, thank you so much for joining me in these dark times.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you so much, Lee, for having me on. Keep fighting. Ha ha.